This is Katie Boyle. I want to wish you all a good afternoon. Welcome you to our breakout session on the state budget, and thank you for being with us this afternoon. So I'm the Director of Government Relations here at VACo, and it's my pleasure to have back with us Jim Regimbal of Fiscal Analytics. Jim is a familiar face to VACo members, a frequent contributor to VACo events, and I want to thank him for being with us today. As many VACo members know, Jim has more than 30 years of experience in state and local budget and tax policy analysis. He served for 12 years on the staff of the Virginia Senate Finance Committee before co-founding Fiscal Analytics Limited in 1999. And in addition to VACo and the Virginia Municipal League, he's worked with the Virginia First Cities Coalition, the Virginia Association of School Superintendents, and the Virginia Healthcare Association. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Economics from the University of the Pacific and an MBA from Virginia Commonwealth University. And so while we would love to see everyone in person today, and we really miss seeing our members, I will say usually the experience of this breakout session at the homestead has been people just packed like sardines in a room trying to see and hear. So at least in the virtual space, we can spread out a little bit. And just as housekeeping measures, since we have so many people with us, we'll be asking everyone to just stay on mute unless you're asking a question or speaking. Please feel free to type questions in the chat box. If you're on the phone, we'd ask that you email questions to Vicki Steinruck, my colleague, and her email address is vsteinruck@vaco.org. And when we get to the Q&A period at the end, folks on the phone also could unmute by hitting *6 on the phone, and I'll remind folks about that later on. So, Jim, I want to thank you for being with us. It's been a really interesting year for the state budget. We had a budget in March, then we had a series of unallotments and paused spending in April. We had a new revenue forecast in August. A revised budget that is on the way to being finalized, maybe even this afternoon. And then by my count, we'll be having the governor's new introduced budget 5 weeks from Wednesday. So a lot going on. We're especially thankful to have you with us this afternoon to help walk us through what's happened with the budget and what we can expect in the coming weeks. So I'll change over to your slides here. And Jim, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Oh, thank you, Katie, and I hope everyone can hear me all right. I miss seeing you guys at the homestead. Boy, it would be a beautiful day up there. I'm going to provide a lot of detail here. These slides, a lot of them are detailed. You're not going to be able to see everything while I'm talking. Try to listen. I do a lot of this so you can go back and look later and analyze and think about some of the things I talk about and put down on these slides. So we're going to do the best we can. I'm trying to do this virtually. So let's go to the first slide. As you all know, we've had probably in fact, I know the steepest but shortest recession this country's ever had due to government mandated shutdown because of the coronavirus. Nobody a year ago saw this coming, including me. I made a joke about it at the VML VACo Day in February about a corona beer virus coming our way, and I kind of regret that in a way, but because it has been a hard times on everyone. But the bottom appears to have occurred. We probably got back about half of the job losses, counting people who have dropped out of the workforce because labor force participation has also gone down. This is really the first service-based recession we've ever seen. Usually it's been goods-based, manufacturing, those sort of things. This is a service-based recession, and there's been some different things that have happened because of that, including the first time really women have been hit more than men in more recent recessions and job losses. And that's because it's been service-based, and they participate more in the service side of the economy. But things are improving. Economic indicators are improving. Even last Friday, government jobs report showed continual improvement. In fact, I can update this slide. There was 6% unemployment in September in Virginia. We actually had the greatest drop in initial employment claims and continuing claims that we've had since this has started, about 20% decline. We're now down to 99,711 initial claims. It was 400,000 in May. We were around 300,000 or so jobs compared to last year. But the general fund is holding up pretty well. Virginia's better off than most states. Our industrial profile, our economic profile is different. We have more government through federal spending, defense industries. Our tax profile is different than many states. We rely more on an income tax. We have a fairly narrow sales tax base, which is not sales tax is holding up way better than people thought it would initially. Therefore, I believe, and I'm going to talk about this later, the general fund forecast reduction that was used for the special session of 2.8 billion reduction for the biennium that was put forth to the special session in August, I think is going to be cut in half. If not in December, then eventually by the end of the year, and it could be better than that. So we're going to do better, I believe, than what happened will be forecast in August. And similarly in transportation, that's going to get hit a little bit more, relatively speaking, than the general fund. But remember, transportation, the largest single state source of revenues for transportation now is the sales tax. And again, the forecast for sales tax was much more dire in the summer than it is now. We've gotten more data coming in, and people are buying stuff. People are buying things, and they're not taking vacations. There's a lot of entertainment, things that trips that we don't necessarily collect sales tax on, but people are buying lots of stuff, and so sales tax is doing better. That's going to have ramifications across the board, K-12 too. So next slide, please. So the current economic situation, as I said, it's a service-based recession. Job losses are recovering about halfway so far. But labor force is down, particularly with women who have to take care of children, as an example, along with those who have lost their jobs in the service-based industries. But is recovering, and sales of goods are strong. You can kind of see where they're strong. Those department stores are gotten somewhat better, depressed. Grocery stores, discount variety, those are doing well. They're above year-ago levels. Internet sales are surging. Thank God for the Wayfair decision by the Supreme Court. Where would we be? Because internet sales are obviously growing way faster than anything else. Brick and mortar sales, auto sales, people are buying more autos, but people are not commuting to work nearly as much. So motor fuel is still down. Of course, the restaurants, hotels, movie theaters, airlines, they're still very depressed. Our income tax is holding up well because the large businesses didn't have to lay off, and they're still in their payments. Small business payments are down. But income tax in general is holding up better than expected. And one reason is because really a lot of the job losses were lower income jobs, to be frank. And yes, small business owners are hurting, but a lot of the payrolls were people making less than $50,000. And I'm going to give you a little stat later, but 52% of our income taxes are filed by people making $50,000 or less, but they only pay 8% of the income tax. So our income taxes are paid by people making more than $50,000 in the main, and those jobs have held up pretty well. So state revenues are holding up better than expected. Next slide, please. There will be long-term economic changes from this, and you as local government officials are going to want to consider that. The longer this pandemic goes on, and boy, we got some good news this morning. I don't know about you guys, but the Pfizer news about the efficacy of their vaccine was really great news. 90% plus, with 40-some thousand in their third phase trials. In fact, my older sister's in that trial. She's a doctor, interestingly enough. And that was really good news. This is going to play out over a year, this vaccine, but it is good news on the horizon. So maybe things won't last as long as they could have otherwise, the changes that might occur. But I still think, business travel is going to be impacted long-term. Public transportation, we know that's been impacted hard. How much is that going to come back? Commercial real estate, there's probably going to be more of these types of meetings continuing in the future. It's not going to continue at this level, but it's going to continue more than it would have otherwise. Residential housing, though, is holding up well. We'll see about commercial. So if you're a locality with more commercial, less, and not relatively speaking, than others, you're probably going to have to consider the impacts on yourself. Virtual education, you know, you're going to talk a little bit more about the loss of students in the public school system this year. It could be 3% or more. How much? Some people may never come back on that. You know, they may continue to homeschool or go to private schools or even have virtual K-12. That might grow. So that may be a continued consequence down the road. On a more positive note, all recessions, you know, engender innovation and entrepreneurship, and this is no exception. In fact, you know, I've noted a Wall Street Journal article saying Americans are starting business at the fastest rate in more than a decade. We're seeing now, they create opportunities, and people, you know, have to look for those opportunities to give themselves a livelihood, but they also see opportunities and take them. And so productivity increases during recessions. Business, you know, creative destruction occurs. Things do change, and so you see collaboration. We're seeing collaboration. You know, think of the drug companies collaborating, innovation rapidly occurring. That's occurring in a lot of places. So often recessions produce improvements for the long term. So it's not all bad. Recessions clean out the less productive, more dead wood faster than would normally happen. You know, sometimes it's not good, but you know, usually you come out at the end of these with things better off. Think of the financial industry, how improved that was from the last time around, from the last recession, and how they fared this time. They were in much better shape because of the changes that took place from the last financial industry. Next slide, please. But local governments traditionally have been hit harder in recessions. I picked the last one, and this time they may as well, because you have a greater reliance on those areas of the economy that have been hit the hardest. You know, the restaurants, the entertainment venues, hotels, your commercial real estate, how you tax, how you get your tax revenue. Again, residential seems to be holding up well. In fact, there's price wars going on in certain places. People are wanting to find larger homes. Sales tax impacts, you know, online versus brick and mortar. What does that mean for counties? Well, a lot of rural localities are benefiting because people are ordering their goods from home, and that is now counted where the sale took place instead of the store in the city or across the other county line. So some localities are actually benefiting, are getting more sales credited to them, the tax. Some less, some more. Local governments, obviously, we did some early on studies through VML and VACo of what's been happening, and the same thing's happening this time. You know, they're trying to make the operational efficiencies just like the private sector. You are cutting some services, canceling and postponing capital projects, using your reserves. Unfortunately, there's payroll reductions going on through either hiring freezes, furloughs, and some layoffs, particularly in part-time employees. And there is been evidence in the past that K-12 funding takes a while to come back, and I expect that will be the case this time. You know, some K-12, you know, is a large expenditure of state and local governments, and there's almost no way to avoid you know, cutting back their budget some way, shape, or form when you do have a recession. And so, you know, I can give you a little bit of on the next slide. If you go to the next one, we can look at how revenue growth from the peak of before the last recession, which happened to be 2009 fiscal year. You can see how the growth, I bolded the growth percentage for the state versus the locality. Both declined in 2010, but again, the state, because of their reliance on the income tax, and the recovery happened much quicker for the state. You know, over 5% growth the next 2 years, next 3 years, whereas localities, their growth rates did not recover quickly. And you know, that may be the case this time again, that localities get a state budget, particularly in some, those that have greater amounts of those types of services than others. So next slide. And counties, interestingly enough, you probably know this, rely less on real property than, I mean, they rely more on real. So the impacts from some of those more direct types of industries are going to be less in many localities. For example, rely less on BPOL, which I think is going to be hit from the small business closure. The transient hotel and motel, the meals tax, although you're going to institute more because a lot of those haven't done it yet. And so maybe your timing was pretty good on that, I hope, when some of you start instituting meals taxes to take advantage of that law change, but you rely less on sales taxes as well. So hopefully the real property holds up through the residential property and the commercial's not hit as hard as it might, and assessments stay up, because so counties may fare better than cities in this recession. Next slide. This gives you a little chart of how the income taxes perform better. It tends to have higher incomes, and that's just the nature of the income tax. We have a fairly flat tax, but even still, as I stated, most of the income tax comes from people making really over 100,000, 75,000 or more, and so on a relative basis. And so those jobs weren't hit as bad, and so I tend to think that the income tax is probably going to fare better than other tax sources. And you can see how it fared better than the real estate tax over time since 2009. They were fairly even in the revenue that they produced back in 2009 and 2010, almost even, completely even. And then the income taxes greatly outperformed real estate taxes since then. So next slide, please. And this is what I've stated to you about where the income tax comes from. You can see again under 50,000, actually about a little over 8% of the filers. I mean of the liability, but 52% of the people filing returns. And over 50,000, is where really the income tax is collected. Next slide, please. Tax. This is actually a little bit older. I haven't been able to update this since June, but even then, you could see the orange bars. How versus brick and mortar, the blue, and the orange is type 12 would be the internet sales, and 10 is stores. You can see the performance, and that's probably grown since then. Internet sales have just skyrocketed, and that's actually been a real help to sales bottom line, that we now collect sales tax on internet sales. Next slide. So I'm going to give you a little briefing now on relief. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but so the government response, the federal government in particular, has been to provide at least four pots of money. They got larger each time, the biggest one being the Coronavirus Relief Fund, the $3.3 billion we got. But there was also other acts that provided the PPP, which we got $14 billion through that. We got the real, when people say there was no real direct federal aid for lost revenue, that actually is not true, because you could say federal Medicaid matching fund increase of 6% was a direct aid, and I think that figure's wrong. It didn't get up, should have gotten updated. I think it's more like $650 million March, and that federal. So it's a lot of money that has been our government 56, and the state having only put 44 for both for all Medicaid, for the children's health insurance, for the famous. So we're saving a lot of money, and that's going to reflect in our state and help in our state budget as well for this biennium. And in fact, Medicaid utilization, because of the shutdown in hospitals, a lot having to handle just COVID cases, there hasn't been as much utilization of Medicaid. And interestingly enough, even with lots of people unemployed, the number of people signing up for Medicaid really haven't grown that much. We're going to get a Medicaid forecast in a week or two. Unfortunately, we don't have it yet. We're going to get a week or two. We're going to see their forecast, but all indications are Medicaid for this current fiscal year is really not going to be a problem in terms of growing more rapidly than we expected. And 2022, we'll see what happens there. But we've actually, in the special session, cut the provider rates of the state budget for once. Next slide, please. So this is sort of the latest. In fact, if you look at one of the governor's amendments, he's got even more. He's got actual detail in his amendments he's sending to the General Assembly today to And this closely matches that. There's probably a few minor things because this is as of October 28th, which Secretary Lane gave VACo at one of your meetings. Didn't have time to put the latest in, but this is very close to what it's going to be. You see at the top the two $644 million distributions to localities. You see the $200 million that went to Fairfax, and then there's a lot of money for testing, but there's and health reasons, you know, and responding on health. But there's also broadband. The governor's put in significant dollars there. There's small business assistance grants of $70 million going to help your small businesses. And there's going to be $120 million, if you go to the next slide, put in for utility disconnection assistance, both directly to one of the amendments, directly to consumers and then to the utilities themselves. So that's going to help with a utility, with problems people haven't paying their utility bills. So keep moving, Katie, to the next slide, please. And sort of the fallback on the use of these monies, you can see in the middle, is trying to restore funding to the VEC Unemployment Assistance Fund, which we expect to be, in the whole $750 million. It was positive, I think, 500 before this started. It's going to be the whole 750. So we're putting some of this CARES Act money back in to help fill that hole, which will lessen the bite on businesses who have to pay increased taxes to build that fund back up over time. So that'll help business to a small degree. So you can take a look at this in more detail at your leisure. Next slide, please. So let's DPB and how localities using their CARES Act money, and they ask the questions you see here and the topics you see here. Your actual spending through June 30th. How did you plan spending it in the two periods, first through September and then through December? And if you go to the slide, you'll see what the responses that came back. There was very, very good. Almost every locality responded in this survey. And you can see the greatest use of this money is for, better health and safety for your employees, $214 million. Some of that actually spent. The blue bar, the red bar plan 30th, and the green bar again through the end of the year. The second one is other, and there's a slide I show because there's a lot of different things you're using your money on. But if you go to then, you got public school assistance is the third largest. Well, actually, it's the second because other really isn't second. Public schools, and then the third largest is direct assistance to your small businesses. And so, to me, that looks appropriate. How you're spending your money, but you're spending in a lot of different ways. Sanitation, personal protective equipment, broadband. You're spending $43 million for that. Or planning to for broadband on your own. So you're using your money in a variety of different ways, as this survey indicates. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that other category of $188 million. There's lots of other things in there. You're using money for additional payroll benefits and costs, tuition assistance, helping in your detention centers to keep people safe there. Childcare programs, we know that's been a problem. Childcare has been a real problem with kids having to go to virtual, people having to stay home, and even childcare facilities closing, but also people having to take care of their children while they go to school at home. So lots of different things that you can see on this slide that encapsulated that other category. So you guys being very creative and use of your monies of that $1.3 billion in CARES Act money. The next slide, please. Now we're going to get into how the special session allocated money, because it's really indicative of how we move get spent even in the future in the regular session as well. Also, what was taken care of. They may not. I want to first take a look at Fiscal 22's proposed general fund resources, sort of near the top on the right, $22.8 billion. Then go to the bottom, and you see 23.2 appropriate balance is we're actually spending more money than we've got coming in. That's why there's going to be some caution on the part of the administration and General Assembly in putting too many things into ongoing spending, because We are at structural imbalance right now. Our budget has been living off prior year savings, prior year unappropriated balances that we carried forward. The 1.552, that's carried forward from the previous biennium. And that's what's cushioning the spending this time. But we're still spending more than we, at least according to the budget, what comes in. Now, as I indicated, I think things are going to get better. So I think revenues are going to be better than those proposed resources. So maybe we'll get out of it on our own with economic growth. This is what was introduced by the governor to the special session. He did include some spending for broadband and housing. Those are basically the two biggest spending items. He did cut your public K-12 funding by $95 million and $93 million in the 2 years because of the reduction in forecast sales taxes. Remember what I said? I think in the regular session, sales tax forecasts are going to go up. So yes, they took care of, you might have heard this, through the gray machine revenue the first year. Non-general funds, this 1 year, we're supposedly going to have a gray machine revenue, which is coming in, by the way. The revenue is coming in at about a tune of $100 million we expect this year. So it would be enough to cover that first year loss of sales tax. But I think the sales tax loss is going to be much less than what they forecast. And so there's going to be some interesting uses of that money that they're not going to have to put it back, and maybe they can use it for something else to help localities. Next slide, please. So report, what it did was it saved, and that's what's before the governor. He really didn't make many changes in amendments in dollar terms, very little. I think it was only 1 million, that VMI study that they want to do. But they saved more money, 280 million, than the governor introduced, and primarily it was from those Medicaid rate reductions and a 1 month holiday in the state health insurance premium. They're self-insured. They're taking a 1 month holiday, and they're also reducing rates. And people are ABC, there's more ABC profits. People are buying more booze. That's smaller, but they are, and that's a fact. So they saved about 280 million more than the government introduced, but they 70 million more. And that's why the unappropriated balance is now down about 300 million rather than the 490 the government introduced. So, and we're going to get into now in the next couple slides how they spent that money in session. So go to the next slide, please. Wanted to show you what was restored compared to the unallotments last April. To give you an idea, and this is not all, there's a whole long list of unallotments, but I came up with some big examples that were important to localities that were unallotted. And you can see teacher salaries were not restored. But you can see the program in the second at-risk 3 and 4-year-olds was the at-risk student support program, which was increased to 26%, was restored in the second year. Housing trust fund money and broadband was restored. Some additional public defender money was restored, especially in the second year. Was fully restored. The step VA mental health program, community-based mental health initiative that we've been putting money into over time, trying to get up to snuff in our mental health system at the community level. The second year was fully. So this gives you an idea. Local departments of social services got some money, about half of what was taken out in the second year. And some land conservation money was actually put back as well. So there was quite a bit of restorations of allotments that were important to localities that did take place in the special session. So next slide, please. There was support for higher education. I already talked about the at-risk add-on, the childhood being restored in the previous slide, but higher education got 80 and then 14 million for GMU and ODU. And then that was sort of I've divided this in sort of 3 parts. The criminal justice reform and the health and human services else. This slide's everything else. And so you can kind of see what they did in everything else. Now let's look at the next slide, what the General Assembly did in the special session. Next slide was they really prioritized health and human services. A lot of rest for things like mental health, for the waivers, developmental disability waivers you see at the top, nursing homes. Step, you can go down this list, psychiatric, the hospitals, nursing home reimbursements, lots of things that have been unallotted in the veto session in April were put back in by the General Assembly, and the Senate really, this was a priority for them, restoring a lot of these health and human service amendments. So a lot of things there were put back in to the budget in the special session. Next slide, please. And lastly, the General Assembly, one of the reasons they were dealing with criminal justice reform. And so there were budget amendments associated with that. And I think, and they put money in for some of this, what they felt were the state costs. There's going to be local costs too on these, as you well know. And so there's going to be mandates. And I think your leadership and your staff at VACo are going to continue to press on them to fund some of these new mandates you might have on criminal justice reform, because some of the things they want to do are going to cost money, and it's going to cost money at the local level. But they did put money in, for example, the $500 bonus for everyone but the law enforcement personnel, police departments. And that was taken care of separately with that $7.5 million, which can be used for bonuses, but it was described as a law enforcement retention funding. So you could use bonuses, you could do other things to retain law enforcement personnel. It didn't have to be bonuses. They were given a little more flexibility than just a $500 bonus. Then you can see money for funding some of the bills they passed. As an example, the Marcus Alert, mental health crisis teams. They put money in for that. I'm trying to look for where that is on here in this slide. Oh, it's HB 5043 and 50 SB 5038 grants. That's the mark. They put $3 million in the second year to start those teams up, provide some money. They also put, interestingly enough, $3 million here in a contingency that, as I understand it, has not been spent yet. So maybe that's going to get reallotted in the regular session, or maybe you have, as a localities, have some ideas where that contingency spending ought to go, because that hasn't been spent yet. They weren't sure what conference committees and some of these bills would produce in spending, and apparently they didn't have any that they thought produced more, more need for more money. So maybe you can give them some ideas on that. Anyhow, next slide, please. Body worn cameras got some money. I know there's a work group VACo on that, so there was money put in body worn cameras. 4 lines down. So what? Next slide, Katie. Thank you. So there were some significant language changes too. And one in particular I know that you're worried about, and that's the ADM losses at the local level. As I mentioned, well, maybe I didn't, but we expect through a vast survey a month or so ago, they found that you were reporting, roughly 3%, statewide losses on average in ADM because of the pandemic and people going to private schools, people doing virtual education, homeschooling, et cetera. And so you remember the SOQ is paid on a per pupil basis. And so if you lose students in your public schools, you lose SOQ funding. And what happens normally is they do a count in September 30th, and then use that count to adjust budget for the current year. And those changes start occurring in payments to you in January based on the September count. And then finally, they settle up with the actual count they use in March 30th. But what happened this year is language put in the special session and say, wait a minute, we know the losses are huge. 3% is very large. And I'm going to show you a slide in a second to demonstrate that. We're not going to start making payment adjustments January. We're going to give the General Assembly time to figure out what to do about this issue, whether they want to, hold harmless, for example, any of these SOQ payment losses to localities. That's a particular issue that you're going to want to keep an eye on during the regular session. They gave you more textbook funding on how to use that. And then there was language on paying a service for special ed students in private day placements. And there was some concern at the local that the private providers were getting paid they were normally, even though they weren't providing the same level of services. And so the General Assembly gave you the right to adjust if those level of services have been adjusted. Some other language changes. You could move to the next slide, Katie. the utility disconnect moratorium, and you extended that to 60 days after the end of this pandemic, essentially, and created a repayment plan, allowing a repayment plan for customers with accounts, but also an off ramp for utilities should they have very large, people who are not paying. And then they allocated $120 million. There was a forth about what the special session did, but you can see the governor is allocating $120 million into his budget amendment that's before the General Assembly today. So to either directly help customers with utility payments or to help the utilities themselves. So there is some money, and whether it's going to be enough for all the lost money that could come from lack of payment, it's unknown, but this will at least help. And then there was also extensive language outlining how landlords may evict tenants too, and so there's been there's been restrictions put on that and language around that. There's a lot to go into there. I'm not going to here, but there was more money also put in the Housing Trust Fund and using CARES Act money to help with problems with tenants and non-payment to landlords, because there's a problem on both sides. People losing their jobs, can't pay, but also landlords not getting rent. That's tough on them. So it's a tough issue. And then some of you are concerned about the language being put in the budget about a solid waste tipping fee, which has to do really with mostly with collecting revenues from out-of-state garbage. But it was an encroachment on localities' ability to have their fees, and so that was stricken out. So there is no going to be. It doesn't look like there's going to be any study of a solid waste tipping fee in the state budget. Next slide. So what are the wild cards? Obviously, knowing what the general fund revenues will be, as well as what your revenues at the local level will be. But I do expect we're going to have a significant improvement of both general fund and transportation revenue forecasts. I don't have as good a sense of how you're doing at the local level. It's much harder to collect data at all 134 localities plus the hundreds of towns. We're going to try to do a better job of somehow getting data on how you guys are doing. But I think at the state level, at least, we're not going to fully know this until the May, June tax filing season. Remember, the general fund, 2/3 of the general fund is the income tax. Yes, we do get good data, and a lot of it is withholding, but 17 to 18% of the collections are non-withholding that really you don't get a good handle on until the May, June filing. And this year in particular is going to be difficult to forecast. Stock market is way up. Look at today, but there's also been a lot of tax loss harvesting. There's also been a lot of small business closures, in tough times. So how much money they're going to be paying up, what their payments are going to be, it's hard to know at this time. And we know there's additional needs out there, and I list them. We are as a state, both state and local, of trying to address these, but there's going to be additional. I don't know what this new Congress, new president is going to do and get together and do. The consensus there will be some additional federal stimulus spending. Not sure how much. You probably have as good a guess as I do on that. If I would guess, there will be some, but certainly I don't think it's going to be at the $2 trillion range, especially if there's a Republican Senate, and especially given that economy has been doing better than what people have expected. So there's going to be that push and pull on additional stimulus. Next slide, please. So here's where I'm going to get into a little meat of my forecast of the general fund, the state's general fund. This is the August forecast, and the loss in revenue that was forecasted, 2.8, that's 1.4 each year, was really the result of a 5% change in growth from 3% growth to -2. Look at the very bottom line in the middle of this chart. It went from 3 last March, and then April, you unallotted it because it became clear we weren't going to get 3%, at least it was that time. And the revised forecast from the summer forecast was -2. 5% reduction produces $1.4 billion loss. When you have a lower base of 1.4, it doesn't. That's how you get 1.4 each year, even though the second year growth actually ticked up in their forecast, 0.2%. So, and so go to the middle, before we leave this, go to the sales tax line in particular. They were forecasting in the middle of summer 9.7% reduction in state sales tax. And one of the direct outcomes to localities was those 95 million per year sales tax distributions for school-age population that they were forecasting you're going to lose each year because of this 10% reduction in sales tax. Recordation taxes, look at that, not as big a source, no doubt, but they were forecasting 13% reduction there. Income tax, they were expecting still 2.4% growth and then a loss and withholding. And so I want you to kind of think about those from 21. Now go to the next slide. So this is my forecast of it, and it's an educated guess. I have my sources to see what's going on with the state, following not only anecdotal sources as well. And I'm not getting wild on what I think income tax is going to do, but I do think it could even be better than what I got here. Could be worse too. Withholding may get a little worse than that, but I'm still saying withholding is just a little above zero on the net basis, 0.7%. Not a lot different than what the August is. So I'm leaving room for something better. Let's put it that way. But look at sales tax. I've gone from -10 to -2. And I actually think it might even be better than that. So it might even be just zero. It might be, no reduction by the end of the year. So I'm going out on a limb, yes, but an 8% change, even though it's still negative, is huge in terms of how much additional revenue. And then look at corporate. Corporate, I think I forgot to mention that on the previous slide. The corporate income tax is coming in good. And the big companies are doing well. They're producing goods. Their manufacturing's up. They're making money. It's not, we're talking about corporate. We're talking about the big guys. The big guys are doing fine. Look at recordation. We all know about that. Housing is hot. People are refinancing. People are buying homes. Now, I did forecast a big drop next year, but when you grow 25% and drop 20, you don't lose the same amount of revenue. So that's providing money. So I've gone from -2 to 1.2% growth this year in general fund revenues in my forecast. And I actually think this is a conservative forecast. I'm not saying they're going to show you this in December. They're definitely going to go up from where they were. I'm not sure they're going to go up as much as I did. I'm going up $755 million from what they were saying in August. You can see that 755 in the bottom line. And then it causes the higher base. It causes to go up by almost 600 million next year. So I'm forecasting half of that 2.8 billion to come back from that August forecast. Half of it. That's huge. Still not good. 1.4 down from where we were last March. But we had a really good economy going there. So we're now, I'm forecasting actually slow growth in the first year, some growth, and then a little better growth next year. And with this vaccine announcement today, that next year could even be better than this. Businesses start coming back. So I'm hopeful, actually. So, and transportation, this was the August forecast, down $750 million. So you can see retail sales is actually the largest single source of revenue. Almost one state's portion of transportation revenue, state transportation revenues. And you can see that got knocked down because, again, they were forecasting 10% decline in sales tax rate. Now, you got to remember, motor fuels is not down as much because they added a 5-cent tax to that, to the motor fuels tax in 21. And so it's not down in total as much as it would be, but it's down apples to apples, $114 million. And so that's what they expect it to be down for the full year. And then motor vehicle sales and use also down. Again, I don't expect motor vehicle to be down as much as they thought. Man, because people were buying autos. They're not using public transportation. They're buying automobiles right now. So next, please. And so this is not a forecast, but this is what's happened through September. Go to the line at the very end versus the forecast. Instead of 9.1% sales for transportation, now through the first quarter, it's actually up almost 11% sales tax. Now there's some anomalies there. I don't think that's going to happen at the end of the year. Without me getting into it, there's some timing anomalies and how the money is paid. It's a 2 months lag, and also there was accelerated sales. So there won't be that kind of level, but it's not going to be -9% either. It's like I said before, in general fund, it's going to be closer to -2 to 0 instead of So they go to that -9. Motor vehicle sales taxes are not down 6%, and I think that's going to hold true. It's not going to be there's not going to be growth there, but it's not going to be down nearly as bad. Motor fuels will be down, but they're not the big. They've grown as we're to it this year with our tax increase, but overall, I think you can probably add 150 million, 200 million to that -750. It's going to be probably 150 million better than that. And then they forecasted on, that's my guess. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give you a little hint about, a little piece of data indication about how spending has happened from for the last few years and where the money has gone to. So if you go to the bottom, total general fund appropriation 14 through 20, 28.5%. Now look at K-12. You didn't grow at the average. You grew less than the average growth. Where did the money go? Well, it went to Medicaid and went to mental health. That's basically what the other health and human services are. Lots of mental health, plus other things, in there. But a lot of the growth has been in funding mental health improvements. So you can see the lion's share of the growth of the general fund from 14 to 20. Also debt service. Debt service grew more, 27%. So that's actually slowed recently. It was higher further, but again, higher than K-12. Higher education, about average. Next slide, please. So,
go ahead. Used for benefits and stuff, not payroll.
I think someone needs to mute Clyde Delaroche. There you go. This slide shows two things. It shows you on a per pupil basis what the state provides in terms of K-12 from direct aid. In the top line, the red line is nominal terms. It's actually the nominal dollars. So in 22, they expect to provide on average across the state. Of course, it's different for every locality because of your comp index, but on average, 6,200 almost per pupil. And that's why I said earlier, it's important to how many pupils you have. You lose students, ADM, then you lose dollars. But then the line below it is adjusted for, if you go back to 2009, sort of the peak year of an inflation-adjusted state aid, we're still down $300 from the state providing monies to the school divisions that you operate. And so we haven't gotten back even yet on a real dollar basis per pupil state funding. Yes, nominal, you exceeded the amount back in 2009 and 2018, really, 2017, 2018. It took a long time, even on nominal terms, to get back what you got in 2009. You're well above that now, but not in real terms, still $300 down. So next slide, please. And what does that mean, really? It means that you're having to provide more of the money for your schools. The funding you provide your 1% from 2009 to 2019. The state only provided 6% growth on a per pupil basis for operations. This is operations funding out of the superintendent's annual report. And so you've provided the growth in funding you've had to provide to your school has been way outstripped what the state's provided. That's the bottom line here. Next slide, please. So remind your legislators of that fact. And you, because of this money that you have to put in, you basically put more than double what you're required. Your required local effort is about $4 billion per year. You put in 4.3 in the last year we have in monies above what you're by the state's standards of quality. And 46% school divisions provide well over 100%, a couple 200% of what they're required. Why? Why do you do this? Because the state standards of quality do not provide, their prevailing salaries is much less than what the real average salary on a weighted average basis. It's way less. They do not cover nearly the personnel that you really employ and have to pay. As an example, only about a quarter, maybe a third, and only about a quarter, maybe less, about 10% of your teacher aid covered by the standards of quality, just as examples. I'm sure there's others. And then lastly, one of the big changes to save money back in 2010, the last they put a cap on that, and they used a funny formula that said, okay, we're going to examine support costs are used at the local level and as a percent in total. And then we're going to apply that same percentage to what we describe as our standards of quality, which are way less than what you do. So that's how they save money. They provided the percentage, they used the percentage support cost overall, the actual percentage, and then applied that to their own definition of what they'll cover. And so, since they don't cover everyone, they pay a lot less in support costs. So that's how they save $300 million a year. Slide, please. And that's why you have to do your RLEs when you have to actually spend effort. And so on pay increases, and I think this is going to be, by the way, I think this is going to be, if there is more money as I forecast available to the general fund, I think this is one of the areas, state employee salaries and teacher pay, that's going to be high on the priority of the General Assembly. And so as you can see, from 2002 to 2009, it grew rather rapidly, teacher pay, and it really accelerated after the tax increases of 2005 were enacted, the sales tax increase. And then the recession hit and it slowed dramatically. You can see from 09 to 18, there was very little growth, and there hasn't been much growth through 2020. In fact, if you applied inflation to the 2009 figure, you would get about 64,000, just to cover inflation for teacher salary, and we haven't kept pace with inflation. If you go to the next slide, Katie, you'll see where the state has only provided 5 state-funded teacher salary increases since 2009. They provided in 2010, 2014, 2016, 2018, 2020, and there was going to be 2 in 21 and 22, but they got unallotted. So we'll see if those get put back if there's more revenue. And I expect that's high on the priority list of the General Assembly. You can see CPI at the last column way outstrips the compound growth of state salary increases. Now, I know you've done some, so I'm sure the teachers have done better than the 13%, but that's what the states provide. Next slide, please. And this is sort of charts the ADM growth across the state. And as I was telling you, 3% ADM is really unprecedented. There was one year of 1.5% drop on an actual basis, 15 to 16. I'm not sure why that year there was an actual drop, but there was. Generally, it isn't a drop. It's only 2 years where there's been any negative at all. If there's a 3% reduction in the count coming out September, which would normally use for the adjustments in January, which are now put on hold, and then the final count in March is 3%. That would be a huge hit. If you take 3% times $6,000 teacher pay, you can do the math. That's a lot of money. So 3% of 1.2 million students is like 36,000 students, and 36,000 times 6,000 is hundreds of millions of dollars. So the General Assembly is going to have to grapple with that issue this session. So we'll see soon from September, so we'll have a good idea of what that reduction is, and then you can deal with how to deal with that loss of revenue. Next slide. County needs, and really give credit to Katie and their staff at VACo for putting these down. There some of them that were pretty obvious, but it's a good list. We talked about the K-12 ones, the ADM and the lack of support in the past, and teacher salaries. But here's obviously broadband support, and just making a point here. Recessions and are opportunities also. And one of the opportunities here is we're going to greatly accelerate the broadband coverage in this state, particularly to the rural areas, and hopefully also for the affordability of people that already that they're in, that they can get broadband, because we've realized how critical it is in our current, in the world, the modern world we live in. And so, yes, it hurts now, the lack of broadband, but accelerate the deployment of broadband much faster than I think it would have been otherwise. And so down the road, positive, for lots of areas of the state that need it. So, that's still on that top line there, additional broadband support. Of course, some of these new mandates, criminal justice reform. There's some mandates in there to deal with those issues, and local government, the front lines, and additional revenue from the state to help implement those reforms are going to be necessary. We know that mental health is a big issue, and community-based mental health is expensive. Think about setting up those Marcus alert community systems, response systems, and it's not going to be $3 million to run those. That was the money put in the second year. It's going to be a heck of a lot more than that to actually do that. Voting, improving our voting, and of course the mental and physical health in jails. The per diem payments in jails has been, and we know a lot of substance abuse and mental health is warehoused in jails for people with that, and that needs to improve. So how do localities and counties come out of this better eventually? Well, maybe we see where the shortcomings are in our economic development, development assistance programs, particularly for small business. So maybe there's a pot that can come out there, and the state and localities, partner and they have starting to do that. I think you're probably learning a lot at the local level, more than I know, because you're dealing directly with your local businesses and the needs they have. So that's something maybe positive that can come out of this. We know that your human services systems, need upgrading, need support, need better pay to get good people and to keep good people. So technology for this human systems, so again, things come out when you have problems. You start to see the solutions better. So we need to press for solving those solutions that we now see. Constitutional officers. I thought you saw some help. Public defenders got money. There was money for body cameras. That's not directly the constitutional officers have to deal with those issues, and so you need support there as well. Next slide, please. And maybe
Jim, that's it. That's your last slide. Yep.
That was it. I went through that fast, so hope I didn't go through it too fast. That was a lot of talking for an hour. I hope you guys could hang with me, and I didn't go too fast, and I hope I made sense.
Jim, I'll say you always make sense, and I want to thank you for providing so much information. Just to answer a question that I've gotten in the chat, we will be making the slides available. We're going to post them, and if I can, I'll actually try to post the link in the chat, but they'll be online on our conference page soon. So I know folks had that question. Also, just want to acknowledge, earlier there was Mr. Voorhees had brought up an issue about the use of the coronavirus relief fund, and he points out that the reason a lot of jurisdictions are defaulting to using funding public safety, public health, is that the deadline is very difficult to meet. And I know that was echoed by Supervisor Kaiser. And I just want to say, just from the VACo staff perspective, yeah, we absolutely understand that and have been hearing that from many members. We've been in communication with our congressional delegation and encourage them to include some flexibility on that deadline. I'll only say, I guess when the CARES Act was passed, it wasn't expected that we would still be struggling so much with the virus this late in the year. It was sort of intended to be kind of a short-term relief. And so yeah, I just wanted to say that, yeah, we absolutely understand. I mean, there's still, there have been both Republican and Democratic proposals that would provide some flexibility, and we'll just sort of see. I mean, I think we've made our wishes known with our delegation, but it's always good to reinforce that with your members, that more flexibility and longer lead time on spending is appreciated. So just wanted to acknowledge that those questions had come into the chat, and I am opening the floor for more questions to come into the chat. Jim, if you're willing to take a few.
Sure.
So if folks could put their questions in the chat. If you're on the phone and you'd like to ask a question, you can unmute yourself by pressing *6. Well, I mean, Jim, while people are thinking about questions, I mean, you touched on this a little bit in your remarks towards the end, but you've mentioned we are likely to see some long-term changes, repercussions as a result of the pandemic, maybe accelerating some changes that we're already in the works. What are some thoughts that you have about how counties can kind of position themselves to succeed in the post-pandemic economy? I know you and I have talked a little bit about economic gardening.
Right. I think a lot of localities are doing the right thing. They're trying to get their small businesses through this the best way they can. Grants, loans, probably more grants, with assistance on how to recover and flexibility and how to operate with safely, giving them the PPE type equipment. You try to business through it because they're really the backbone of a lot of economies, and our economy in general is business. I think a lot of people are recognizing that. But it's interesting that you always see businesses, some react quicker than others. Some react to the changing circumstances better than others. And you see that again. You're seeing that on a large scale, and you're seeing that in small businesses as well. I think the corporate style businesses, think of Chick-fil-A. You guys have noticed lines at Chick-fil-A, those that are ready versus maybe a mom and pop little restaurant. They're having a harder time. So I do think that some of the more corporate, some of the ones that got deeper pockets that can handle, let's say for a restaurant, takeout better than others, or outdoor seating better than others. They're gonna be able to withstand this better. But I do think every recession has changes that last. And this will not be different. You can see the broadband issue being one. You can see not the need for business travel probably not being as great anymore because the acceleration in what we're doing right now, and people see it's doable. You don't need to go across the country or across the state to do this for every little business meeting. That will have ramifications for commercial real estate. I work downtown. I still go down there. It's safe as heck because nobody's down there. Nobody's down in downtown Richmond. So Katie probably knows that too. And I'm parking on the very first floor of the deck, which I used to park way down lower if I got in at 9 o'clock. So I think the longer this goes on, the more those changes will stick. But under any I think some of these changes will stick. On older people that are using online, shopping that didn't do it before, they're forced to. They're going to continue to do it. They're going to shop more online. So there's changes that are going to happen, and we're going to all have to adapt, and local government's going to have to is going to have to adapt as well.
Thank you. So we've had a question that came in from Meg Bomke with Stafford County. She's asking, do you believe that CSA will move forward with a more expanded pilot program this year? And Meg, you can feel free to correct me if I'm misrepresenting this, but I think this has to do with some flexibility in being able to use CSA funds in public schools, which is something that I know we've supported. Stafford has advocated for a long time. And JLARC is reporting on the 16th. And so we'll see what they say, but I wonder if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I don't have too many on that. I was going to say JLARC's going to report. If that you were asking me that question, Katie, or the other person? You asking me?
No, I was just saying that JLARC's report will be out soon, and we'll see what they have to say in it. But yeah, I just wondered if you had thoughts.
No, I really don't. I think we need to wait and see what JLARC says on this study and to get a better sense of where this might be headed. So I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that we met with JLARC staff and we referred them to some of the programs that have had success in public schools serving kids with high level needs. And so I know they went out and talked with some folks, and hopefully that was a good model that they'll want to recommend pursuing. So there's another question that's come in about kind of the effects of COVID on ADM. Do you think ADM will continue to be held harmless till the end of June, the June 30th, or the end of the fiscal year? And then sort of what happens beyond if we still are experiencing kind of pandemic conditions?
No, I think that's a perfect issue that local governments are and make their views known about the importance of that. And really, I remember the last recession, there was a hold harmless year for the was hit so hard, In Northern Virginia, real estate went down very hard and made all 95 localities composite indexes go up because of that. And the General Assembly held that harmless because of the big impact on many localities' budgets. So they put hold harmless money in for a year. There's a lot. It depends on the pressure that you guys put on your General Assembly. I mean, they respond to pressure, and the impact could be quite large. And that's why I think it's important. I hope I'm right about revenues, that they'll have the revenues available to address some of those concerns. And they would probably view these as on a one-time nature. They would do something as a hold harmless. And so the second year, that may or may not, they may phase it out, but they probably won't keep something like that. And whatever they do is not going to be ongoing. It'll be more of a 1 or 2 year thing. But that's going to depend on how much pressure you put on your representatives and the governor to help that because of this pandemic.
Yeah, thank you.
The issue I have, if I can say one more thing, I think one of the longer term questions is, we go back to the previous question, is there going to be a permanent reduction in public school students because of this? And it could come from lots of things. It could become because some people, I'm not saying huge amounts, but some people realize, wow, I can get my child at home and teach him, you learn through broadband, or the private school, I'm going to stick with that. Or there's lots of things you could think about that could make the loss of ADM, and I'm not talking 10%, but a couple percent, permanent. You could easily see that happening as a result of this.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, I see Supervisor Biggs had pointed out, that spoken to that issue about potential long-term ramifications. And she points out that possible layoffs could occur of school personnel if it's not addressed. Montgomery County is down about 300 students presently. So yeah, definitely a lot to be considered moving forward. We've got another question that came in about support for seniors who are on fixed income, and what's been contemplated to assist seniors who were sort of making it and now are experiencing stresses in their finances.
Wow, that's interesting. I hadn't heard that one before. I'm sure that the pandemic, if people weren't employed before the pandemic and they were, let's say they were over 65 and they were on Social Security and Medicare, I'm not sure how this changed their situation. So I'm sure that would rise to the level, something would be addressed. Because really it was not a change. Do you see something different, Katie?
I would just say I'd have to kind of review the specifics. I know, having conversations with the Commissioner of Social Services, he had spoken about caseloads going up on public benefit programs, especially SNAP. There was some federal assistance in the bill that was passed before the CARES Act. The Families First Coronavirus Relief Act included some funding and also some regulatory flexibility on some of the congregate nutrition programs for seniors, to kind of allow those meals to be delivered to people's homes so that you didn't necessarily have to bring people together and potentially expose them to the virus. So there was some additional funding put in, and also the regulatory flexibility. And I'd have to refresh my memory on how long that regulatory flexibility lasted. But I do know that is something that the social services community is concerned about, kind of additional need coming through the sort of the public safety net.
And I see in the chat room the issue price increases that have hurt people on fixed income. So that's an interesting issue, and also the ability to get out. And elderly people, this has hurt them because they haven't, they've been most at risk, and really, not parents are like that, and they have to really be very careful about this, even more than other people. And so I don't know if the state has really addressed that at the federal level. That that list of things that CARES Act money was used for, because I don't know that anything directly was sent to senior citizens directly. There's lots of areas where they were trying to share testing and PPE and things like that to help, but not a direct addressing of seniors. And really, they've been hit the hardest in terms of death in particular.
Hello.
Yes,
This is Jerry Booth. I have a quick question, if I could.
sure.
It's on the utility repayment plans. If I understood it correctly, it's set up to where payments can be made to customers or directly to the utilities to keep for repayments of non-payments. Would that also include public service authorities, since many localities do have public service authorities that take care of solid waste and water?
Katie, can you answer that? Because I think the answer is yes.
This is Chris from VACo.
Yeah, I'm phoning a friend.
This is Chris from VACo. I kind of handle this portfolio. Jerry, I believe you are correct in that regard. It does apply in that instance.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Okay.
All right, going once, going twice on questions.
Actually, I had one question. Can you hear me at all?
Sure can. Mhm.
It's Joel from Iowa Lake County. In regards to, of course, COVID, we have the fears surrounding the virus. And so people are not going to get medical treatment like they once were, and or providers that would typically provide some of those treatments may not be readily available. Do we see that as, I strongly believe that from every crisis comes an opportunity. Do you see that community medicine may play a part in this? Do you think the localities are going to have to start planning for that type of, because you're talking about the changes that are going to come about and maybe stay with us for a long while. Do you think the community medicine is something that we need to be budgeting for, or looking for resources, or maybe collaborations with some of our healthcare systems?
Hey, Joel, how do you define community medicine, please?
Well, typically, when I say community medicine, I'm thinking about, I'm going to use an example to make my point. You've got an elderly person who maybe at one time had a caregiver that would take them to and from doctor's appointments, maybe just for follow-up, for, general type of nothing emergent. And so you may end up with the need for someone to go out and make sure they're taking their medication, maybe just do follow-up on some type of very minor care. I guess it's almost an extension of your emergency medical system, but not necessarily to an advanced life support type of care. More of a supportive care, because these people do not have the opportunity, or are they either fearful and aren't reaching out for the services, or maybe the caregivers that used to take them. I know in our community, there were a lot of people, and I'm going to be stereotypical, elderly, maybe widows, that took care of other widows or widowers. And of course, they're staying in too. I guess, there's obviously costs associated with that. And there's some areas in Virginia that do have some sort of, and I use that term, community medicine already. But I just didn't know if there had been any discussion or thought about that.
I think there's been money put back into areas that are sort of near that. If you look at that list on slide 22, you'll see funding put into programs that maybe not hit exactly what you're saying. So there is attention to this community-based care issue in Virginia. We are moving more and more towards that community, providing more funding for community-based care. And so I think you've identified an additional area that needs attention. I don't think that the things they're doing directly hit that, but some things are close.
Right. And I guess when I was looking at that earlier, I was thinking more along the lines of social services, that kind of stuff. Whereas I think the model is, I'm sure you're aware of, is a little bit more of an extension of the localities' emergency services.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But I guess there's no clear answer for that. I guess just for food for thought and throw it on people's radar, because we are going to be dealing with things we never thought or could have imagined post-pandemic, really.
Right. Like, as I was saying in the presentation, you during these kinds of times when you have recessions, problems, you see the problems way more clearly, and sometimes you try to address that allows you to address them, for the long term better.
Thank you.
All right, well, we're coming to the end of our time here. There's been one last question posted from Ronald Peters about discussion or efforts on enforcing social distancing requirements. My recollection is that there was some money from the Coronavirus Relief Fund to fund health department costs on that, but Jim, you may have other thoughts on that.
Well, I'm not sure the question. Maybe it was the governor reinstituting requirements on social. I haven't heard anything like he's encouraging that, but I don't know how you institute a requirement. I guess you could, but hard to enforce something like that.
Yeah. Supervisor Peters, did that capture your question? Well, we may have to leave it there. Jim, I want to thank you again for all the great information. This is always a wealth of knowledge and great material to take back to our counties. I've shared the link. Gage has posted it on our conference page. So you'll be able to take the slides with you and digest them a little bit. And so I want to thank everyone for being with us, and thank you to Jim. And
Thanks.
with that, I think we'll stand adjourned.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.